All right, so we're back. I got the chat working again. That's all we needed. We're good. We're getting going here. We're on the air. We're doing TV. We're doing the show. Whatever it is, we're here. We're going. All good. Um, so it's obviously it's a slowish time of year. Or it's getting close to a slowish time of year. Um, we're firmly into the off season for everything but baseball. I know obviously if you're a soccer fan, there's certainly plenty to go on about right now, and I know the U.S. Men's soccer team plays in about an hour, and there's obviously been quite a bit of news made in that regard the last few days. With the guy on the men's soccer team being given a red card and then having the red card rescinded, by all accounts, due to the president, the fine president of these United States, getting involved and deciding to return the favor from all of those bribes he was receiving from FIFA to get them to reinstate the guy to play tonight. So, it's a tough time right now. And as I'm getting my bearings here, it's a tough time for this year. There's been two big national, sports competitions, international sports competitions where you compete as a nation. And that's been the Olympics, and then the soccer, the World Cup. And, there was a sort of thing with the Olympics, especially with the men's hockey team and really in general, of sort of people kind of debating about, if you're maybe not feeling very patriotic or very good about your country right now, about rooting for the national team. And, I listened to smart, thoughtful people kind of say, the Olympic teams are not, an extension of the government. They're, they're a reflection of, the best that the country has to offer and all of that. And, that was certainly true. But then, of course, the U.S. men's team wins the gold in hockey, and they immediately become this propaganda arm of the federal government. So it was like those people who were making those very good, very well-intentioned arguments then saw those arguments get diminished in the aftermath. And the players on that men's hockey team certainly didn't cover themselves in glory with regards to how they behaved, how they responded to some of that stuff. But, now you have the soccer team, and it's a little different from a demographic standpoint. Obviously, a lot of the guys on the U.S. men's national soccer team are, let's just say, not people who are embraced by the overwhelming majority of the federal government, the upper levels of the federal government at this point. So you thought, okay, this might be a little distinct from what happened with the hockey, only to now have at the moment before the U.S. team plays in the round of 16 with a chance to advance to the quarterfinals, to see them insert themselves by putting their finger on the scale and getting the and you'll notice I'm very carefully not mentioning the guy who got the red card and has been reinstated. I'm very carefully not mentioning his name because I have no clue how to pronounce it. But by all accounts, it seems like that was a very bad call. That he should not have been given a red card for that. But it's also pretty unprecedented for, I guess not unheard of, but it's very rare for FIFA to come in and overturn a red card and reinstate a player, especially on such short notice. I mean, the last game they played where he got that penalty was 5 or 6 days ago now. And not only, did they not in the immediate aftermath, they didn't do anything for several days after that. So, here we are on July the 6th, and just maybe 3 days ago they overturned it, and he'll be allowed to play tonight. And obviously Belgium, who they play, is not happy, nor is much of the international soccer community, because they see that the U.S. sort of is getting favorable treatment and not you know not not without some credence to that argument, I guess you would have to say. So, that game starts at about 8 o'clock. And what kind of happens to me with the World Cup and with a lot of other stuff is I get to the point where it's like, I'm not going to sit down and watch a game, like a soccer game, if I'm being honest, but I will, I will be aware of what's going on and, be able to kind of follow along, but I doubt I'll ever, maybe if the US was in like the championship game of the World Cup, could I see myself sitting down and actually watching it like end to end? Yeah. But until that time, it's more just like kind of checking in and seeing what's going on. So there are obviously a bunch of different things to get into. So I'm just testing my audio here. All right. So it seems like that part is working at least, and I can delete this. Okay. So, from a local and usual topic standpoint, there's a few different things we could get into. One of which is the Yankees, who continue to just play horrendous basketball, they would probably play horrendous basketball as well, but they are certainly playing horrendous baseball at the moment. And we'll get into them in a little while, but they just, this kind of run would be much more damaging in any other year or in the other league, but the Yankees are catching a bit of the benefit of an absolutely horrendous American League this year, to the point where, even though they've lost 9 out of 10 games, they still have, not only are they the first wild card at the moment, they still have a substantial lead in terms of being the first wild card. And they are still, I guess, a couple of games clear of a few teams for the second best record in the American League, despite having lost 9 out of 10, despite having lost 7 games in a row and then winning a game Friday and losing the 2 after that. Despite the fact that they just got done losing a series to the Minnesota Twins for the first time since 2014. And I mean, that says a lot more about the Yankees' run of dominance over the Minnesota Twins than it does anything else. But it's still, after the Yankees completed that 7-game losing streak to the Red Sox and then to whoever the hell else it was middle of last week, maybe Detroit, I remember saying like, oh, it's the Yankees. It's, the exact team you'd want to see coming in for them, which is Minnesota. And they did what they needed to on Friday to seemingly right the ship. And then they turned around and they lost Saturday. They lost Sunday. And they are now currently 4 games back of Tampa. They've lost, I think at one point they had lost 7 games in a row and Tampa had won 8 games in a row. So they lost 7.5 games of positioning in just a little over a week. But, we enter the last week of the Major League Baseball first half, although it's really more than the first half. But the All-Star break will be upon us at this time next week. And by the way, no show next week. I will be in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina at this time next week. We are leaving Friday afternoon and heading down via rented electric car to Myrtle Beach for a week of relaxation and fun and unwinding. So no show next week. We will be back 2 weeks from now. Probably keep up a little bit of a sporadic schedule between July and August. And then as we get into late August and we really get on the doorstep of football, we'll really start picking it up again. Even though I mentioned the Yankees and soccer too, I want to start with the NBA. A lot has happened in the NBA from a free agency and a team move standpoint. We'll start with the Knicks and then we'll go from there because there has been a bunch of other stuff that has happened this week. But we'll start with the Knicks. And just before we get into anything, I just kind of wanted to there's been last week, I guess the 30th, which would have been last Tuesday, was the first day the teams could like start to negotiate. And people, we kind of knew the Knicks weren't going to be real active in free agency. And we knew that Mitchell Robinson was going to be a long shot to re-sign with the Knicks. So a lot of moves happened, and I saw people sort of posting things along the lines of like, oh, what a brutal day. This is terrible. And people going like, oh man, I'm living down here in Philly and this is a rough day. It's like, again, not to get all philosophical, but it's like at the point of we were having this discussion, the Knicks were less than 2.5 weeks from having won the championship. If you wait your whole life for your team to win a championship and your team gets it and they get it in the way the Knicks won it this spring and summer, and less than 3 weeks later, you're totally over it and back to just rending your garments about the fact that they lost, Mitchell Robinson in free agency to the Celtics and that, the Sixers made moves to get better in the Eastern Conference. I really don't know what to tell you other than like, you're not leading what I consider to be a very fulfilling experience as a sports fan. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean you don't pay attention or you're not aware of what's going on, but like the idea that your team wins it, like most people who are fans of a team, any team, the goal is to see that team win a championship. That needs to be like permanent. You need to be able to enjoy that championship forever after that. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, no matter what happens, if the Knicks win a title again this year, like next June, if they go back to back, or if they don't win another title in my lifetime, I'm still going to be pulling up games 4 and 5 and all the games throughout the playoff run and the game 1 against the Cavs Eastern Conference Finals comeback and watching highlights of that, watching, the trophy presentation, watching highlight videos, compilations, whatever. Like at the very least, it should last for you until the start of next season. If suddenly 3 weeks later, it's like, I think sometimes people mistake that, like, and usually you see this more in like let's say when the Knicks were up 3-0 on the Cavs in the Eastern Conference Finals, if you said like, well, who would you rather play in the finals, the Spurs or the Thunder? You would definitely get an answer from somebody like, let's worry about the Cavs first. And it's like, I'm not going to play or coach or put tape together or even be the guy who sets up the lockers. Like, it really makes no difference whether I'm looking at the finals, whether I'm focused or not. The games are going to play out exactly the same, one way or another. So it's like, I think too often fans are like, well, moving on to the next one. It's like, no, we're fans. The point is not that you have to move on to the next one. The fact is that you can enjoy this for a long time and ideally forever. So that was just kind of an aside. So, as free agency or as I guess today was really the first day they can officially sign, but as sort of the period where you're allowed to agree to deals and discuss, where free agents are allowed to talk with other teams, as that opened last week and in the few days before that, the Knicks had shored up some of their outstanding issues. They signed Jose Alvarado, basically took care of bringing a lot of their players back. They brought back Jose Alvarado. They brought back Landry Shamet. They basically shored up deals with 8 of their top 10 guys from last year. And Jordan Clarkson is still kind of out in the ether, but it had always seemed like a long shot that the Knicks were going to bring back Mitchell Robinson. As they made those moves, it became clearer and clearer that the Knicks were not going to bring back Mitchell Robinson, not due to lack of interest, but due to just the economic realities of what that would entail. So, somewhat surprisingly, earlier in the week, last week, they had announced that they were not picking up the option on Ariel Hukporti, the third string center, and letting him hit free agency. And last Tuesday morning, it was announced that he'd agreed to terms with Philadelphia. So, sort of the immediate reaction to the Knicks being probably not able to keep Mitch would have been, well, they'll have Huck Porty on the roster, and ideally they'll pick up somebody between, who's maybe not as good as, maybe not as good as Mitch, but is still good enough to play minutes over Huck Porty. So it was a little surprising the Knicks let him go, but the reality of the situation is, and this is what I feel like is getting a little bit lost in this whole discussion, is when you talk about the second apron in the NBA and staying out of the second apron. And look, I think I said this last week. Do I wish James Dolan was going on radio shows and expounding on what the team is going to do and what they're not going to do? No, I wish he wouldn't, because then it looks like everything is said is coming from him. And when an owner in baseball comes out and says, we're not going to go above the luxury tax threshold, or, we're going to keep the payroll over, under a certain number of millions of dollars, whether you're a fan of a big market team, a fan of a small market team, you have a right to be livid, because there's no salary cap in baseball. All there is a luxury tax, which just means you give more money, from your coffers over to the the fund that goes to the smaller market teams. And if you're a fan of a smaller market team, you obviously probably know your team's not going to compete with the likes of the Dodgers or, the Mets, or even the Yankees, I suppose. Although that's becoming less and less of a factor every year. But there you can be annoyed, because the only difference there is that it costs the owner money, basically. And we all know these franchises in baseball make a ton more money than they want to admit. Coincidentally, as we get, into a different part of the calendar year, we may be talking more and more seriously about a lockout come 2027 baseball season, but we'll save that for another day. It's a little different when you're talking about the NBA, because when the owner says we're not going into the second apron, especially when that owner is James Dolan, and, I think every Knicks fan I've talked to, the mileage varies a little, but I don't think Knicks fans are suddenly in love with James Dolan just because they now won a championship. Certainly the opinion of him is much different than it was a year ago or even a month ago, but it's more the opinion of he made the absolute right decision to hire Leon Rose and let Leon Rose run the basketball operations. Although, again, if we revisited all the people a year ago saying, well, it was Dolan's call to fire Thibodeau, if that's true, it was a good call. I think at this point we have to admit that. So, but anyway, I don't want to hear James Dolan, and I don't like the perception that he's calling the shots when he says we're not going over the second apron. What you do need to realize, and why this is different than just an owner saying, talking about finances, there are real basketball consequences to being over that second apron. And I think I read these last year, but we'll just go over exactly what the second apron does if I can find the bullet points. So, second apron, teams do not have access to the mid-level taxpayer exception. Teams cannot use trade exceptions created when combining the salaries of multiple players. Teams cannot use trade exceptions from any prior year. Teams lose the ability to trade first-round picks that are 7 years in the future. If teams remain in the second apron for any 3 years of a 5-year period, their upcoming first-round draft pick is automatically moved to the end of the first round. And then that's in addition to what happens when you're in the first apron, which the Knicks are, which is that you can't acquire sign and trade players. If they can only acquire sign and trade players if they move below the apron. Teams who execute a trade must match salaries within 110%. And teams cannot sign any players waived during the regular season if their salary is greater than the mid-level exception. So being above the first apron already gives you some handicaps that then is compounded by being in the second apron. So, I guess the point I'm trying to hammer home is it's not just the Knicks or their owners being or James Dolan being cheap when they say they don't want to go into the second apron. And I think I went into this last week, but I would like to think for the right situation, they would be willing to go to the second apron. If the realities of some of these contracts were different, and again, I know some of these guys are locked up long term, but let's just play a hypothetical and say if next year at this time it was the difference between the Knicks being able to bring back Karl Anthony Towns versus not being able to bring back Karl Anthony Towns, I think that would be the situation you would go into the second apron for. With Mitchell Robinson, you are talking about a guy who has been with the Knicks a very long time. And yes, he's only 27 years old. So he's not certainly, he's been in the league since he was 20. He's certainly not shot by any means. He's not, 36 and barely hanging on. But, you look at a guy who has to be very, very carefully managed from a minutes standpoint and from a, fatigue standpoint. He played in last year, which was seen as sort of the perfect sort of glowing way to handle Robinson, which was to never play him in back-to-backs. They seriously limited his minutes early in the year. His minutes per game ended up as 19, which felt like it was a little higher because he might have played some games towards the end of the year. But it was the lowest it's been in his career, except for last year when it was 17 minutes a game. But he also only played in 17 games total last year in the regular season. So this year, the numbers on Robinson, 60 games played. I started in 16 games. Most of those were when they were still trying to figure things out early in the year. He averaged 5.5 points a game, 8.5 rebounds, including 4 offensive rebounds a game, which is obviously a really strong number. Averaged about a block a game. We talk about the free throw shooting, and it's terrible. It's gotten worse every year. He's barely a 40% free throw shooter at this point. So that is a fair knock on him. He's a guy who teams will foul to send to the line. I don't know that that's ever really worked as a strategy, though. Like somebody was saying to me, I can't remember a game that actually cost them. Now, maybe it's because it doesn't cost you a game in the last few minutes. It costs you a game in the second quarter or whatever, but there's never been a time down the stretch in the fourth that I can remember where he missed 6 free throws in a row and they lost because of it. But it is a factor. It is something you have to consider. He's also, he's not going to start for the Knicks. The only way he starts for the Knicks is if Towns is hurt and Robinson starts, and Robinson, even if he's starting, is still going to play the minutes that he plays. It's not like his minutes would go way up if Towns was hurt long term. Robinson would still play, instead of 18 minutes, he would maybe play 22 minutes, and they'd have to adjust accordingly. He still wouldn't play back-to-back games. So this is all my way of saying, from the aspect of, what if Towns goes down? Mitchell Robinson isn't the answer to, what if Towns goes down anyway? Because he's a player who's going to do certain things for you, and he's a great rebounder, and he's a great interior, defender, shot blocker, whatever. He's had some monster playoff games for them, But when you're talking about giving him a deal that brings you into the second apron, and we'll go over what the Celtics contract with him. Let me pull this up here. I believe it was a 3-year contract for Mitchell Robinson contract. I believe it was a 3-year contract for $47 million or so. So about just under $16 million a year for 3 years. That deal pushes them into the second apron now. So at the very least, they're in the second apron. And we talked about what happens if you're in that apron for 3 years. You're talking about a guy who his best case scenario is that he's going to play 60 games. That's him healthy. He was healthy this year and played 60 games. Now, you can say one of the reasons he was healthy was because he played 60 games. But so that's a guy who, again, he's not going to start for you. He's not really going to be on the floor with Mitch or with Towns all that much. So you're still going to need a third center for the days that for the quarter of games at least per season that he doesn't play. You're going to need to get minutes from another center besides him and Towns. So it's not like, It's not like he takes the place of two men on the roster or anything like that. Best case scenario is he's going to play 60 games. Best case scenario is he's going to shoot 50% from the free throw line. He's not a starter, or she wouldn't be on the Knicks. He's not a volume scorer. This, unfortunately, is a luxury player to have at this point. If you sign Mitchell Robinson, if you're the Knicks in this situation, you're basically running it back with the same exact team you had last year. And I get that's comforting because they just won a championship, and one of the strengths of their team was how deep they are. And, there is something to be said for bring the gang back together. If you sign him and go into the second apron and then fill the rest of your team with veteran minimum players, and he's hurt, which you cannot say, let's say instead of 60 games next year, it's 40 games. You now have to get minutes for half the season from whether they would have brought back Huck Porty or whatever they would have done, while you've also now seriously kneecapped any chance to acquire a player in the middle of the season. So, do I wish he hadn't gone to the Celtics? Yeah. They talk about him going to the Lakers. I would have been fine with that. Anywhere in the Western Conference or the Wizards or, the Bulls or really whoever. Do I wish he hadn't gone to the Celtics? Yes. I would like it if he hadn't gone to the Celtics and I could root for him sort of from afar and say, hey, I hope he has a really good season and all of that. And I still hope he plays well. I hope it doesn't result in a lot of Celtic wins. And we'll talk about the Celtics in a minute because they got problems of their own here. But I think Knicks fans need to take a little more of a holistic approach and sort of recalibrate. If you don't trust Leon Rose at this point, and I don't mean blindly, like the guy can't do anything wrong, but if you don't trust that, like, this was not James Dolan pinching pennies and saying, we're not going into the second apron, and Leon Rose begging him and, not being able to convince him and Dolan putting his financial interests in front of the interests of the basketball team. Well, I can't talk you out of that. But what I think is more likely is they had decided as a team, we're not going to go into the second apron this year. We're certainly, we're not going to do it for Mitchell Robinson. That's going to mean he walks, and we'll figure something else out as we go. And now we saw the only real move they've made to bring in somebody from outside so far was to fill, and it doesn't fill the Mitchell Robinson hole, but they brought in Andre Drummond to ostensibly be the backup center. So they got Drummond from Philly as Philly got Huck Porty. So they kind of swapped Drummond for Huck Porty. Drummond's one of those guys, if you look at his basketball reference page, it looks like he's been in the league a million, and he's been in the league a long time because he's been in the league since he was 19, but it looks like he's about 40 because after Detroit, he played with Detroit from the 2012-2013 season through the 18-19 season. And then in 1920, he went from Detroit to Cleveland. In 2021, he went from Cleveland to the Lakers. In 22, he went from Philadelphia to Brooklyn. Then he was with Chicago for 2 years, and then he was back so he's been with a bunch of teams. So there's like 25 entries on his basketball reference. So it looks like he's been in the league a long time, but he's only 32. Now he's 32 with 14 years of experience because he came into the league at 19. So he's obviously got, a few pelts on his horse. But, I look at the numbers from last year, played in 63 games, started 25 of them. Sort of interestingly, he had the same problems that Robinson did earlier in his career with free throws, but he's actually kind of consistently gotten better to the point where I believe he's at least serviceable free throw shooter at this point. Yeah, he's kind of ticked up as the years have gone on to the point where last year he was a 63% free throw shooter, certainly not going to break any league records, but if he can settle into being a 58 to 62% free throw shooter, it's still a significant improvement from Mitch. 6 points a game, last year, obviously way down from his days in Detroit when he was, a 15, 17 point a year player. 8 rebounds per game, which is right around where Mitch was. I don't think he's the same player Robinson is. He's an upgrade over Huck Porty if they had just been plugging Huck Porty in. The other thing you're going to see from the Knicks is that realistically, they're probably going to do something mid-season. Because if you look at the right now, and we'll move on, we'll get to the other NBA stuff, we'll get to baseball, but to be honest, the Knicks are the most interesting part of this right now, at least for me. If you look at what they have sort of from a contract standpoint, the best thing the Knicks are going to have is next season, the 26-27 season, they're going to have Miles McBride on the last year of his contract. Realistically, that is going to be a very valuable trade asset if they need to acquire another front court player at the down the stretch or at the deadline or even in December or whatever. And I guess the thing I would just say is, if you forget about even the free agent signings, forget about them picking up Bridget or the Brunson really is what I'm talking about. Just the trades. And I'm really not even talking about the Bridges trade because there's still going to be detractors of that. To be honest, the Bridges trade to me is one that it's hard because it's so elementary. It's like they gave up a ton of picks to get Bridges and it was seen as a disaster, but they won a championship. So now it has to be seen as a positive. And it's tough because I believe that, but I also get it's an incredibly reductive way to look at it. The only thing I will say that really I could get into other ones, but the two big trades, the player trades, they acquired OG Anunoby, and in doing so, they traded RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley, who were centerpieces of, that team that had become a perennial playoff team. And the Knicks traded those guys for OG Anunoby. And there were people who didn't like that move because, it was guys who'd been part of building a successful, team with the Knicks, and they were traded. And then, just a couple off seasons ago, they trade Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo for Karl Anthony Towns. And these are the moves that built a team that won a championship this year. So I get that anytime I suggest, they might trade Miles McBride in the offseason, it's like, well, McBride was part of this championship or during the season. I mean, again, I think it's a matter of you either trust Leon Rose or you don't. And you either trust him that he's got a pulse on what the team needs and what guys, can go out as part of deals to bring back guys that can help them win. And what guys are, core guys on the team that can't go. And I think basically at this point, your rule of thumb is the 5 starters are not going to go. Bridges, Towns, Brunson, Anunoby, and even Hart. I don't think he would trade Hart. Obviously, if the Hall was an all NBA level player, they would probably trade Hart. But I don't think just as part of a deal for another, I don't think Hart would go anywhere. But in general, I think everybody else is somebody that for the right deal could go. So the Knicks team that takes the floor on October 3rd or whatever it is not going to be the Knicks team that they go into the playoffs with. And I think, we should expect that. And while I don't want to lose Mitchell Robinson, you can't try to win last year's championship again. Like I said, as a fan, that one gets etched in forever and relive that team forever. And those guys will be, getting together at reunions forever once they're all retired from the NBA. But Leon Rose and Mike Brown and James Dolan and William Wesley and all those guys who put this team together, they're trying to win the next championship. They're not trying to re-win last year's championship. And the reality of that is keeping Mitchell Robinson would have meant going into the second apron. I also thought it was interesting that he did confirm, and this is one that nobody's going to really remember because they won. Mitchell Robinson did confirm that on the eve of the NBA Finals, he broke a bone in his hand punching a wall. That's I understand it was a serious personal issue and he thought his brother had been killed in a car crash. He's been going through a lot of personal stuff. And we can all understand that on a human level. But I want you to think about if he had broken that a little more severely and was not able to play, or if the Knicks had lost this series to the Spurs, how that would be being seen within the, organization and fan base at large. So, I don't think that should so easily be swept under the rug on a do whatever it takes to bring him back thing. So with that, let's take a break. We haven't played any supermarket music in a while, so we'll play some supermarket music. We'll come back. We'll talk about some of the other moves in the NBA, and then we'll get into the baseball. I'll yell a little about the Yankees, and we'll move on.
You want to know why we created
7:45 or a couple minutes after 7:45 here in rainy Shelton, Connecticut. But we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back on the Split Decision. back here live on the Split Decision on Facebook Live here on this, not on Facebook Live, on YouTube, excuse me, here on this Monday, July the 6th, 2026. Before I get too far into anything else, just something that, and it's somewhat related to this show in some way. So we had bad storms here. You know, I mentioned it, I think, in a lot of the Northeast, but depending on where you were, the severity of the storms might be different. It was really hot for a few days this week. And then Saturday, on the actual 4th, in the evening, we had some pretty powerful thunderstorms roll in. And I know there were some places where there was some flooding and some damage. I saw some trees uprooted on my way to work today. I know north of us may have gotten it really bad, and looks like in Dutchess County, back, you know, where I'm from, there was some, I saw Lake Walton Road, the road I grew up off of, was flooded. But in Pauling, New York, the CVS burned to the ground, burned down. It was storm-related damage, and it caught fire. And for those, a lot of people who have been there before, that CVS on Main Street in Pauling is where Pauling Public Radio used to be. And it's been gone a long time. I was trying to see if I could find any kind of post. So for anybody, I started doing the show with Andy on Sportsmanlike Conduct in August of 15. So almost 11 years ago, because I just started working at RK a couple of months before that. And I know for like a few months before that, Andy was working, was doing a show on Sunday morning, the Doo-Wop Diner. And he kept doing that for a while. And then Andy and I started doing Unsportsmanlike Conduct on Monday nights in August of 15. And we did it into, I think, January or February of 17. And then he stopped doing it. He kept doing his Sunday show for a while, but he stopped doing the show with me. And I changed it to the Split Decision. I feel like it was February of 17, because I think he and I did Unsportsmanlike Conduct for about 18 months. And then I did the Split Decision on Pauling Public Radio from February of 17 until the end of 2018, if I'm not mistaken. I'm almost positive that's what happened. And that was, you know, we've talked about it before, but they just wanted me to start doing stuff to raise money for the station and all that I just wasn't that interested in. So I just told them, you know, hey, here's some money for the rest of the year, and then I'll start doing the show from home. Because they had said, like, well, one of the things we're pushing is for people to also do the show on Facebook Live while they're broadcasting. And I kind of realized, I can just do it on Facebook Live then. So I stopped doing it then. I started doing the show from home, from my apartment in Poughkeepsie. I think beginning of 2019. I feel like I probably did some shows through the Super Bowl, and then took like a month and a half off to, like, you know, set up doing it this high tech way that I do it now. But I don't know if it was COVID or even before COVID, that station went out. It had been a few years since I thought about it, and I went and looked, and I'm like, oh, it's gone. Like, I drove by and whatever and noticed there was no social media activity anymore or anything like that. So I don't know when it went out. I'm going to say sometime around 2019, maybe 2020, but somewhere in there. And I guess a yoga studio went in that side building where the station used to be. But yeah, yesterday, or I guess Saturday night, there was a massive fire at that CVS that burnt the building down. Burnt the CVS and the yoga studio, which used to be Pauling Public Radio, down. So, you know, it sucks because it's right in like the center of town there. I never really knew anything about Pauling before I started doing the show there. You know, I spent a lot of afternoons kind of killing time in that parking lot, waiting to do my show at 7:00 after getting out of work at 4:30 or whatever it was. But you know, when I saw that yesterday, I was just kind of like, oh shit, that's where the station used to be. So figured I would just at least mention that, and hopefully everybody was out and nobody. I don't believe anybody was hurt, but I don't want to just say, oh, thankfully nobody was hurt, because I don't know that for a fact, but I don't believe anybody was hurt. So hopefully they can rebuild at least that CVS or something there, and the yoga studio finds a suitable place to go as well, because we don't want to see anybody put out. So let's talk a little bit about some of the moves. I'm not going to go through all these. A couple of the highlight moves. Kawhi Leonard going back to the Raptors is real interesting. Leonard, it was always a weird thing because he was going to be a legend with the Raptors, even though he only played 1 year there. He gets traded from San Antonio or whatever. I think he got traded. He goes to the Raptors for 1 year, wins them a title, leaves, goes to the Clippers. I don't think there was ever any bad blood from Raptors fans because he won them a title. They were obviously sad that they weren't going to be able to keep him, but I don't know that there was ever even any real thought given to them being able to keep him. I'm sure after they won the championship, they were kind of like, maybe there's a chance, but he leaves, goes to the Clippers. I think you'd have to consider his Clippers career a disappointment, but he now goes back to the Raptors. So that's obviously interesting. Now he's had some health issues. He's not the player he was when he was on the Raptors, 8 years ago now, 7 years ago, but still an interesting move to see him go back there. We've also heard a lot that LeBron will not be going back to the Lakers. He's going to sign somewhere else. The names you've heard the most sort of bandied about Cleveland has been, one of the ones that has been discussed, which I think, makes the most sense, that he would go to Cleveland. They're obviously a contender. They were in the Eastern Conference Finals last year, although they didn't acquit themselves very well in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Knicks. He could go back there for a third time, kind of finish his career back where it all started. I mean, I think he exercised any of those demons with his run of 4 straight finals appearances and bringing that team a championship. You still hear about Miami just because of the previous relationships in Miami. The Sixers, with the move the Sixers have made, which we'll talk about in a minute here, seems like a possibility. And then, but it was interesting because when it first came up, you thought, okay, he's going to the Warriors. He's basically all but confirmed he's going to go to the Warriors for a minimum, a league minimum deal to play 1 more year so he can play with Steph Curry and be coached by Steve Kerr, and the Warriors maybe will be able to sort of see if they can steal 1 more really good year out of their, I don't even know if you can say aging core anymore, but old core at this point. But they, you feel like with how much of a foregone conclusion that seemed to be, that if that hadn't totally fallen apart, he would have already signed there. So to me, the fact that how much of a foregone conclusion it seemed to be, and the fact that it didn't happen already, would indicate to me that he's going to go somewhere else. I don't know if I'm fair in basing that, in making that assumption, but that's kind of the way I read it. And then you also heard stories of if the Knicks hadn't won, he'd have tried to go there to be the savior of the guy who brings a title to the Knicks. Let me just say I'm happy to be. I like LeBron James. I still think LeBron James is good. If LeBron James called Leon Rose and said, I want to come here for the veteran minimum, I don't think the Knicks should say no. But I also don't think it's an avenue they need to pursue. But my brother and I have talked about this a lot in the past, and I think my brother's got stronger feelings on it than me, but you would really have to regard his time with the Lakers as a disappointment. I know he won a championship. I'm not even of the opinion of like, let's diminish the bubble championship. I do think that it's fair to mention that. It is fair to mention that. And I've said before, on some levels, on a lot of levels, I'm glad the team that won that was already a team that's won a bunch of championships and had won a championship as recently as 10 years before that. Because if it had been a team that, like, I'll just use recent history as if it had been the Knicks, if that had been the Knicks championship, would I have loved it and been pumped about it? Yeah. Would it feel exactly the same? Probably not. If I'm being honest. So, I think it's probably good that it was a team that, but whatever. Let's even pretend that was a normal championship. Again, it was the Lakers. He goes back to Cleveland when he went back to Cleveland after Miami and won a title. The express goal there was to go win a title. The Cavs had never won a championship. The city of Cleveland hadn't won a championship in 50 plus years at that point. The goal wasn't, win 4 championships. The goal was basically to get them a title. And, the first year they had a chance at it. Everybody else got hurt. The second year they won it. The 2 years after that, they were there, but weren't really in either of those series at any point to Golden State. The second 2 years, the Golden State had Durant. But when he went to the Lakers and he was coming off of, he was going to be 34. He was coming off of 8 straight NBA Finals appearances, 4 with Miami and then 4 with Cleveland. The last years before he went to the Lakers, let's just read this off. Starting with his last 2 years in Cleveland, he was the MVP. His first year in Miami, he was 3rd. His next 2 years in Miami, he was the MVP. And the last year in Miami, he was 2nd. Then in Cleveland, he was 3rd, 4th, and 2nd. Went to the Lakers. His first year, they missed the playoffs. He finished in 11th in MVP. 1920, he finished in 2nd. They win the title. Then 13th, 10th, didn't register 3 years ago. Last year, he finished in 6th. The Lakers never, let me pull up their actual franchise index while he was there. So the first year, they went 37-45, missed the playoffs. The next year was the year they won the title. 2021, they lost in the first round. 22, they went 33-49 and didn't make the playoffs. The next year, they actually did get to the Western Conference Finals, which I kind of forgot about in 2023, but they got swept by the Nuggets. The year after that, they lost in the first round. The year after that, they lost in the first round. And then this year, they lost in the second round and got swept. So after that bubble year, they won 2 more playoff series. They got to a Western Conference Finals. And I know he got old. But, like, again, the story being different for the Lakers as it is to, if he had signed with the Clippers even, or pretty much almost any other team. But, like, him signing there, I don't know if the organization or most Laker fans would have signed up for he's going to win 1 title. And again, we'll take even the weird bubble aspect out of it. That's not his fault, whatever. So he's going to win 1 title. They're going to miss the playoffs like 4 times in his run here. They're going to burn through coaches and supporting staff. I don't know how many Laker fans would have signed up for that. And again, you can say, well, they won a title, but like, I almost look at it as like, there are a lot of Yankee fans who are like, well, when we got Alex Rodriguez, the deal was not he was going to win 1 championship. Like, that was not what he was bought here for. That's not what the expectation was. The expectation was he was going to win a lot more than that. So I think that's a fair caveat when you consider the organization, the position of the team, the level he was brought in at, which was still playing at a, top 3 in the MVP voting every year level. So, now he at 40 something years old, 42, whatever he is, will look to, you would imagine, play just one more season. You could see him go back to Miami and play with Giannis. You could see him go back to Cleveland and try to kind of fit in there and get them over the hump. You could see him go to a team that looks like, he would fit well on the Sixers. It's a ready-made team, that sort of thing. So who knows? You would imagine, but within the next week or two, we'll have our answer. I thought Golden State was basically a done deal, and it's obviously not, because it's not done yet. The biggest news that I think is worth covering coming out of the last week is the Jaylen Brown Celtics thing. And I guess you kind of knew this was coming, because they tried to trade Jaylen Brown for Giannis, and they didn't get him. The Celtics were the runner-up in that sweepstakes to the Heat, and they'd kind of dangled Jaylen Brown out there so much, where the thought was like, well, they're going to have to trade him now. And you heard, you speculated, this is a guy who 2 years ago was the MVP of the NBA Finals, who this year finished sixth in MVP voting, second team All-NBA, led the Celtics to this year that was much, much better than anybody expected, with Jason Tatum hurt most of the year. They were upset in the first round of the playoffs, but in the regular season, they had a phenomenal year. Brown's been an all-star pretty much every year the last 6 or 7 years. He's just going to turn 30 next season. I think a lot of people figured if they trade him, they're going to get a haul. And then when the deal came out and they basically traded him, they traded him to another Eastern Conference rival in the Sixers. They didn't get Maxey or Edgecombe, and I don't think the Sixers would have done that, but like that, those are the comparable players on the Sixers. And basically they got a few picks and Paul George, who still has a little bit of basketball left in him, but not much. I mean, we saw him in that Knicks-Sixers series where there was a couple of games he had a big first half and then barely did anything in the second half. I think he might have had 2 points in one game after like a 17-point first half. Then he had 2 in the second half. Like, there's no way that was a straight value trade. And he's also not even an expiring contract. He's got another couple of years left on his deal. So the response from the Celtic fans was pretty quick and pretty furious. I guess Brad Stevens finally talked to the press today, and I'm reading an AP article from a guy named Kyle Hightower. Says from their perspective, it was necessary to give the franchise the flexibility it needs to compete, which managing a team's balance sheet will be more important than retaining multiple homegrown stars. Stevens said Monday that he is fully aware of the criticism that surrounds Boston's front office in the aftermath of its stunning decision last week to trade Brown to the Celtics division rival for Paul George and multiple draft picks. Jaylen and I sat down early June and we talked about potential future in Boston. I told him we were ever to trade Jaylen, that it would be a sad day for me personally. Certainly the emotions all of us have felt. I do think we are empathetic and understand this is a really hard thing. Path looked a little more challenging to me, Stevens said. I might be wrong. I'm not going to stand up there and be defensive about that, but the path looked a little more challenging with 70% of our salary cap and such a high percent of our usage tied into 2 players. Says Brown enters next season with more than about $185 million remaining on the then record 5-year deal that he signed in July of 23. So just 3 years ago. Had he stayed, the team would decide whether to give him a 2-year extension of around another $140 million, combined with the almost $190 million left on Jason Tatum's deal was deemed too much for the Celtics to carry. George will make $54 million this current season, which combined with Jason Tatum's $58 million will constitute about 70% of the Celtics salary cap in 2026. George having 1 season and a player option remaining after that. So that's the thing that gets lost. George is under contract for next year. He's under contract for the year after. And then for the 28-29 season, he's got a player option. And I think you can bet on him picking that player option up, because he's not going to get comparable value or anywhere remotely near that if he were to opt out and hit the open market at 38 or whatever he'll be at that time. So they're gonna have his contract on the books for a couple of years here. So the Celtics are going to sell this as getting flexibility. They say Jason Tatum was not consulted. Steven said Tatum was not consulted about the decision to ultimately trade Brown. So, the Celtics, I'm guessing that a lot of Celtics fans had come to the conclusion that they were not going to be able to keep, or not they weren't going to be able to, that they weren't going to keep Jaylen Brown after what had happened, the weeks before that. And you hear rumors about locker room stuff, and I haven't seen anything definitively posted, so I'm not going to get too into it, but maybe he wasn't the most popular guy with some of his teammates. People have tried to make hay out of the fact that Tatum didn't exactly rush to the press to say they shouldn't trade him. But I think when the return came back and that was all they got was some picks, which are going to be probably late picks because the Sixers are going to be good, was some picks and Paul George, who even if he's capable of still playing some good basketball, is hardly the centerpiece of a deal you want in 2026 when you're giving up a guy who has had the last couple of years that Jaylen Brown has had. I think Celtics fans were understandably very, very apoplectic about this. There's part of me that wonders, okay, is the goal here that they're going to, without saying it, kind of start to rebuild around Tatum and try to kind of tear everything else down and make one more move or make a run with, rebuild it up around Tatum and make one more run. So there's that as a chance. And I can't, and I'm not trying to bring everything back to the Knicks, but you can't help but think about like how tenuous all of this is. 2 months ago, or 2.5 months ago at this point, the Celtics are going into the playoffs as the 2 seed and the favorite in the Eastern Conference. And the Knicks, we thought, were looking at maybe another, second round. Maybe they get to the Eastern Conference Finals again kind of thing, although they would have had to play the Celtics in the second round. There was a period a couple weeks ago where the Celtics were up 2-1 in their series. The Knicks were down 2-1 in their series in the first round. I'm not sure if it overlapped where the Celtics were up 3-1 at the same time the Knicks were down 2-1, but whatever. Had the Knicks lost that series to the Hawks, Mike Brown might have been fired after 1 year. The Knicks would have probably made a big swing at landing Giannis. Who knows, even if they didn't do that, who knows if they would have tried to do something to really drastically change the core of Bridges and Towns. Obviously, Brunson wouldn't have gone anywhere. Anunoby wouldn't have gone anywhere. But it could have been a very different team. The Knicks might have gotten killed for letting Thibodeau go and replacing him with Mike Brown. Meanwhile, the Celtics looked like they might have been, poised to get back to the NBA Finals. In a year they were supposed to be down because Tatum was hurt. It could have been a year. They could have theoretically gotten their second title in 3 years with this core and been, on the verge of another little mini dynasty. And here we are a couple of months later, and the Knicks are, kind of the toast of they're the NBA champions. So they are the toast of the NBA, and guys like Brown and Towns and Bridges and, to a lesser extent Brunson, because I think Brunson had done it already. But like these guys had all totally vindicated their careers and the moves that got them to the Knicks and the team that Leon Rose built and all of that. And people are saying Jalen Brunson might be the best free agent signing in NBA history and all of this stuff. Meanwhile, the Celtics are trading Jaylen Brown for what looks like pennies on the dollar for Paul George and picks. And people for the first time are really starting to criticize the front office and wondering if the new owner is interfering and trying to control finances and run the team from the owner's suite and all that. So, it's just amazing how sort of precarious it can be and how quickly things can change. And I'm not going to say I'm upset about it. I sort of half jokingly said to my brother on the air last year, after the second round series where the Knicks knocked the Celtics out, but before the Knicks had been eliminated themselves, I had sort of jokingly said to my brother on the air, maybe this is the basketball version of '04 in reverse, where not only did the Knicks upset them, maybe now after 80 years of the balance of power for these two franchises being one way, like it was for the Yankees and Red Sox, and then flipped, maybe that's what we're seeing in basketball. And I was mostly joking, but everything that's happened in the last 14 months has certainly vindicated that theory that I had back in May of 2025. So, we'll see. I still think the Celtics, are not done making moves, whether that's this offseason or going into next year, but certainly a questionable move as far as the fans were concerned in Boston. So let's do this. Let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll get into baseball for a while. If anybody wants to call in, 845-416-8704 is the number to call in. Otherwise, we will take a break. We'll come back. We'll start to yell about the Yankees. And
Watch
we
this.
will.
I'm going to launch a business
we will
in
take
60
it until
seconds
there's
using
nothing left to
Shopify's
discuss,
AI
and then we will
Sidekick.
send
Nope.
things on home. This will be a split decision on Facebook, on YouTube Live. back here live on the Split Decision here on YouTube Live. It is 8:22 here in dark and rainy Shelton, Connecticut. I believe the rain is going to continue until all day tomorrow too. Great. I thought it was going to taper off at some point during the day tomorrow, but if it is, it ain't going to be anytime soon. So we are going to get a lot more rain tomorrow, it would appear, and then hopefully things clear up. Although the little rain icon is on the weather for every day this week. Although you look and it's like Wednesday, the little icon is the rain cloud, but then you pull up the actual weather and it says 10% chance of rain between midnight and 6 a.m. and less than 0.05 of an inch of rain. So that really does not deserve the rain icon, but it gets it. So anyway, it won't be crazy hot, which is good. Hopefully it's nice and warm down in Myrtle Beach when I'm there. Again, as a reminder, no show next week. I will be in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina at this time next week. We are planning this coming Sunday to go to a Myrtle Beach Pelicans game. The Class A affiliate of the Chicago Cubs is the minor league team that plays in Myrtle Beach, and they're unfortunately on the road most of the week next week, but they are home. Actually, the homestand that starts like now, so they'll be home through Sunday. So we're going to try, if the weather cooperates, we're going to try and go to the Myrtle Beach Pelicans game on Sunday just to check a minor league stadium off our lists. We don't actually have a minor league stadium list. That would be fairly unwieldy, but we're going to try and at least get to that. So the Yankees are sort of miraculously up 3-1 at the moment, or they were a minute ago when I checked. Let's see if that's changed. And that's, that is the one interesting thing is, like, as crappy as the Yankees have been playing, and as much ground as they've lost to Tampa Bay in the last, 10 days or whatever, they're 5 games back in the loss column with a 4-game stretch at Tropicana Field starting tonight. If they were to win even 3 out of those 4 and pick up 2 games, they would be just 3 games back going into the last weekend of the first, of the pre-All-Star break, I guess you could say. So, like, as much as it sucks and as bad as they looked and as much as injuries are becoming a concern, you can afford a stretch like this as long as this is the stretch. Like, they've lost 9 out of 10. They've looked like shit doing it. They seem like they're the worst team in baseball. But if they go 5-2 the last week of the pre-All-Star break, and they're 54-42, and they're back 12 games over 500, and they're 2 games out of first place, you go, all right, they stumbled, but they survived it. As much as it sucks, 7-game losing streaks and losing 9 out of 10 don't kill you in baseball. What kills you in baseball is a 30-game stretch where you're 7-23, or a 20-game stretch where you're 3-17. Like, that's what kills you. So, like, the Yankees have been bad for the last month or so, really. If you go back to really since June 18th, they went into Thursday, June 18th at 45-27, and here they are at 49-40. So that is a 4-13 stretch. So pretty much exactly what I just said. They lost the last game of the series to the White Sox. They lost 2 out of 3 to the Reds. They won 2 out of 3 against the Tigers. So they were 17 over. So still, even that stretch there, they were only a game under 500. And then they lost 7 games in a row, got swept by Boston, got swept by Detroit, and then they lost 2 out of 3 to Minnesota for a 1-6 homestand. So they have been, horrendous, and, we'll look at the numbers here in a minute, but this is a big week coming up for them. All on the road, 4 games against Tampa, The next three tonight, tomorrow night, Wednesday night, all at 6:40 p.m. And then Thursday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then they go to our nation's capital to finish the first half of the season. 3 games against the Nationals, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, before they head into the All-Star break. So, especially if they could put a hurting on Tampa in the first half of this week, they could really go a long way towards erasing some of the horrendous last couple of weeks, last week in particular, because coming out of the stretch, they're going to have some interesting matchups. They're going to play they're going to play the Dodgers at home, coming right out of the All-Star break, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the 17th, 18th, and 19th. Pittsburgh at home, who's not great, but they're better than Pittsburgh usually is. Then they're going to go to Philly, who's been playing great since the first couple of weeks of the year. They're going to go play the first place White Sox, who, again, are not great, but they're going to play the first place White Sox. They're going to play the Cubs, who are good. You've got St. Louis, who's been a surprise this year, Atlanta, Seattle, then Toronto. The first month after the All-Star break for the Yankees is going to be a gauntlet. So they really need to get their shit together in the next couple of weeks. And I think that really needs to start by, I don't even know about splitting this series against Tampa Bay this week. I think they need to win 2 out of 3, or they would need to win 3 out of 4 in this series. And they can certainly go a long way towards that by winning tonight. That game, since it started at 6:40 and is moving fairly fast, is actually going into the 8th inning already. The Yankees are up 3-1. The Yankees have 3 runs on 1 hit. Let's get a call here real quick. Hello? Hello?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I hope you don't mind me calling when you were in the middle of talk.
Of course not.
Don't you think that it would do the Yankees some good to change managers right now?
So I do. I think, I don't see what I'm not somebody who thinks firing the manager is always the right decision, or always is a cure-all, but how much more do we need to see? What has this guy done to engender this level of loyalty from the Yankees? You know what I mean?
And the reason I bring it up is on the radio the other day, because I'm down here in Phillies country. Mm-hmm. And one of the radio shows, they were talking about the change in managers when they got rid of Thompson and gave the job to Mattingly. Mm-hmm. And, obviously the Phillies have a lot of talent, just like the Yankees do. But they then gave the specific things that Don Mattingly is doing differently. He's emphasizing defense. He's handling the bullpen differently. I just think that the same thing could happen with the Yankees. Like you said, they have nothing to lose. It's not like he's Joe Torre and he's won 4 championships. I'm just and we don't see a lot of them, but when I do see him and he's doing his press conferences and is just, it's been a tough stretch. We need to play better. His laid back, lackadaisical, maybe it's just time for a change. I mean, I think they're missing an opportunity. I mean, everything with this team is about Judge. They're only going to go as far as Aaron Judge takes them if he comes back and he's healthy. But I don't know. Like you said, I don't understand why this guy still has the job when they're underperforming the way they are.
I think they're going to give him a pass and they're going to blame it on the injuries is what I think they're going to do. Now, if you look, obviously they do have some significant injuries. And like you said, with Judge, they're going to go as far as Judge takes him. And Judge has been out almost a month now, and he's not even ready to get re-imaged. I don't see how you're going to see Aaron Judge before Labor Day at this point would be my guess. But that's what I think they'll use as an excuse. And I just, for years now, and I get they probably weren't going to do it after they made the World Series 2 years ago, but I just don't see what this guy has done that's good enough. At best, he's like a league average level manager. Wouldn't you rather get a different voice in there, even if that is the pitching coach or the bench coach or, whatever? they don't seem like it. The defense is consistently shit. They
didn't they have 8 errors in a game a week or so ago?
I know the Mets had 6. I don't know if the Yankees had 8 in the game. They might have had 8 in the series. I'd have to look, but
I thought they had. Yeah, they're terrible defensively. Like I said, when I heard this conversation and they talked about the differences in Mattingly, and let's face it, it's not like Don Mattingly is a screamer and a butt kicker. He's not Billy Martin. I mean, we all know that would never play in this day and age. But I'm just thinking, it's like, Aaron Boone just always seems to be, he's so even keeled, and we need to play better, and we're going through a tough stretch. I just like to see somebody maybe bring and what the hell, do it now, and if it doesn't work through the end of the year, then hire a new manager over the off season. But how long's he been the manager now? Was it about 9 years?
Yeah, because I think the last year of Girardi was 17, because it was the year they kind of surprisingly got to the ALCS. And that was the year they lost in 7 games to Houston, and then they fired him. So Boone's been the manager. I think this is his 9th year. I think 18 was his first year as the manager.
Yeah, I mean, that's a long time. I mean, the Cora in Boston got fired and he won a World Series. It's like, I don't know. I think he does what Brian Cashman wants him to do. He doesn't push back. He doesn't argue with him. He and Girardi, obviously, I think it got contentious or, argumentative at times. So I think he's the perfect Brian Cashman. And you and I have had this conversation. I think Cashman should have been let go a while ago. How long does a guy get to keep a job? For forever? It's like,
Yeah, I think with that, you almost have to just again, I'm not one of these people who ignores the first 15 years George Steinbrenner was the owner of the Yankees and all the problems that ensued from that, or 20 years really. But I don't know how much Hal cares. I think as long as the team is respectable and the ballpark is mostly full every night, and they're not making headlines for being a joke off the field or whatever, I think the level of success that they've kind of settled into is okay for him, which is they're going to be a playoff team most years, even if it's a wild card. And, obviously they had a chance to win the World Series a couple of years ago and they just got outclassed by the Dodgers. But I don't know that the fact that they're, probably headed for a wild card and a first round playoff exit, I don't know how much that bothers him.
I guess as long as he's making, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year, like I say, it's just the Mattingly comparison to me is really on point. And especially when you think about Don Mattingly, they talk about this all the time. He doesn't want that job long term. He said he'd do it this year. And I guess the only reason he's in Philadelphia because his kid's the general manager. But it's like he just brings a different, focus. Like they said, he emphasized defense. He emphasized some different things. I just think, Aaron Boone is, it's run its course. I mean, they got to try something different.
Yeah, well, and that's what I think too. Is you got to, at some point, it's just it's not saying that the manager is the only problem, or that, firing the manager solves everything, but it's at this point, would a different voice really hurt that much? You know what I mean? Yeah. Even if it's a voice from that same staff, naturally the guy's going to do something a little bit differently, or emphasize something a little different, or bring the manager from AAA up. I know they don't usually do that in the middle of the season, but I don't think they're going to keep losing 9 out of every 10 games or anything like that. And, the American League is so weird this year with how mediocre to bad the whole American League is. But I just feel like I've seen this before. They're going to get into the playoffs probably as a wild card. If they play a bad AL Central team in the first round, they'll probably be able to beat them. And then I just, they're not going to do anything at the deadline because they never do anything at the deadline. And yeah, they got some really horrible injuries this year, Fried and Judge. I really can't count Stanton because he's always hurt. You really can't act like that's any kind of a surprise, but they're just, maybe it's because of how much of my focus was on the Knicks until a month ago or 3 weeks. They're just uninspiring.
They are. And everything's been the Knicks, and another few weeks, and everything's going to be the Giants and the Jets. So it's
yeah, probably in about a month when training camp starts. So
yeah, because all the expectations with the Giants. Like I say, I don't see where it would do any harm. And even if you promote one of the assistant coaches, just say to them, hey, listen, shake it up a little bit. Like I say, it's not like you can turn over, the food tables in the clubhouse anymore. That kind of crap doesn't work with these guys. But I don't know, just do something different than same old thing every day. I'm sick of looking at him when I see him in the dugout.
I agree with you. I think it was time a few years ago. I think you saw everything you were going to see from him, and it wasn't going to get dramatically better. So it's like, all right, well, let's see if somebody else can raise the ceiling a little bit. But like I said, I think the view from the upper levels of that organization now is just like, keep it respectable, keep it steady, make the playoffs. Maybe we'll get lucky. Like, I don't think they'd be comfortable with, losing 100 games or anything like that. I don't think he's that aloof, but like, I think as long as they don't embarrass themselves and they can still plausibly pass themselves off as being the Yankees, the brand, I just get the sense that's good enough for them.
Yeah, so Hal's happy with Cashman, and Cashman's happy with Boone, and it just, like, year after year, it's the same thing. You get your expectations up, but then this is just reminding me of the year Judge got hurt out in Dodger Stadium. It's like, once he's off, when he's out, it's like, oh man, this team is bad.
Well, and that is a point that somebody raised, and I think they're going to have to do this, which is his last two major injuries were that one and this one, both of which occurred in the field. He's a good fielder. He's got a great arm. Him being out, getting hurt in the outfield does nobody any good. I think it's going to be time starting in 2027 to start, pretty heavily transitioning him to being a full-time DH for the rest of his career.
Yeah, and you brought up Stanton. You know how I feel about him. I mean, I know he's had his moments, and a couple times it's been in the postseason. But I mean, he's essentially, what are you getting out of this guy? 30, 40 games a year now, and you're paying him $25 million? It's absurd. So.
Yeah, and I guess he's under contract through what? He's under contract through 2028. So he's got 20 next year, because they have a club option for 28. And I don't think they're stupid enough to pick up that club option when he's 38 years old. So, yeah, so for one more year, you just, start moving Judge to being a full-time DH and figure something out with Stanton, get him his at-bats. You're going to be paying him his money anyway, but I don't know. I don't know. I don't think you can keep running Aaron Judge out there to get hurt in the outfield, even if he's a good fielder. You're not paying him to be in the outfield.
No, not the kind of hitter he is. You gotta milk it for all it's worth. So anyhow, I just figured once you started talking about the Yankees, I'd ask you about it.
I appreciate the call.
All righty. I'll talk to you later.
Take care.
Bye now.
All right. That was my father calling from Dover, Delaware, in case anybody hadn't heard. So I'm looking at the soccer here, and Belgium scored a goal 9 minutes into the game. U.S. scored a goal to tie it 31 minutes, and then 2 minutes later, Belgium scored again. So they're getting close to halftime, and Belgium is up 2-1. Yankees are still up 4-1 now are up 4-1 now in the bottom of the eighth. They finally got a couple more hits. They have 4 runs on 2 hits. They 2 home runs from Jose Caballero. The first in the 5th inning, he hit a 3-run home run. That was their only hit of the game. And now he hit a solo home run in the 8th. So the Yankees have 4 runs on 2 hits here in the bottom of the 8th inning. Cam Schlittler continues to pitch very well for the Yankees. He is still in the game. 7 1/3 innings so far, 3 hits, 1 run, no walks, so only 3 base runners. Running his ERA down to 2.02, and he's been really, really good. So, hey, if the Yankees can, this is a good opportunity for them to undo a lot of the damage from this past week. So, just a couple updates on the injuries as I'm looking at it. So, Clark Schmidt, I'm not going to worry too much about. Judge has been on the DL since June. This update is from last week. Yankees manager Aaron Boone said Friday, Judge isn't expected to be ready for a reevaluation later this week. Stress fracture in his rib on the right side. So again, he's not even ready for a reevaluation. So let's even say that things move along and they're able to do that during the All-Star break. So we're basically in mid-July. I think if you're expecting Aaron Judge back before September 1st at this point, I don't, I do not expect to see Aaron Judge before September. Now, realistically, the Yankees will be in it. They'll be in the playoff hunt. They'll probably be in a wild card spot. Judge coming back in September and having 3-4 weeks worth of at bats heading into the playoffs is, not the worst thing in the world. But if you're, like I said, you're definitely not going to see Judge in July. I don't see how you're going to see him in August. So he's going to be out long term. Max Fried is another one who he seems to be inching his way towards getting close to coming back. The update from yesterday is that he threw a 36-pitch live batting practice session Sunday and will face hitters again Thursday or Friday, and then we'll go on a rehab assignment. So you would assume starting, a week from now, he'll start his rehab, give it 3 to 4 weeks from there. So maybe the second week of August, you'll see Fried back, which would be great for them. Rodon is now on the DL. He's apparently going to be out until mid-August now with an elbow injury. And just to round things out, Giancarlo Stanton said Monday that Stanton has yet to resume running since he suffered a setback with his strained right calf in early June. So another one you really can't bank on for anything really going forward. I think your best hope for Giancarlo Stanton is that maybe he's healthy enough to be a pinch hitter as you get close to the playoffs. So, you can't really bank on him. And just going back to what my father said, I definitely agree about Boone, and I've talked about Boone. I don't think Boone's the biggest clown in the world, but I think you've seen what you're going to see from him. It's almost like a quarterback who's in his 7th year, and he just, he's okay, and he's he can win you some games, and he doesn't usually throw 5 interceptions a game or whatever, but he's not a young quarterback anymore. This is what he's going to be. More or less, he's 95% of what he's going to be the rest of his career. That's kind of what I feel about Boone, except probably even more so. He's not going to suddenly become a much more successful manager. He's not going to become a guy who does things entirely differently. The results are what they've been. And again, we're grading on a sliding scale, but you don't get the sense they win a lot of games because of Aaron Boone. Games that are on the margin, that it's really not worth just saying, hey, let's see what somebody else can get us in this situation. So do I think they're going to do it? No, I don't. I don't have any belief that the Yankees front office is going to make a mid-season managerial change. It's been a very, very long. The Yankees have had 3 managers since 1995 or 1996. If you think about that, Joe Torre was the manager for 12 years, right? 96 to 07. And then Girardi was the manager for 9 years, and now Boone has been the manager for 9 years. Since I was in 5th grade, the Yankees have had 3 managers. So they're not a team that changes managers very often. And, that's funny if you think about the 70s and the 80s, but certainly Joe Torre didn't. And I honestly, really relitigate 20 years ago now, but it was time for Torre to go when Torre went. I would have kept Girardi, but I understand, but the fact that Boone gets just as long of a leash as these guys, when those guys won championships, and in Torre's case, they won multiple championships. I just, I'll never get it. I'll never get the commitment to Aaron Boone vis-a-vis the results, but it is what it is. Let's take a quick look at the baseball standings, because we really have not done much with baseball yet this year. So we mentioned right now the Yankees 4 or 5 games back in the loss column of Tampa Bay. And again, they can chip a game off of that tonight and every night for the next 4 nights against the Rays. Baltimore 6 games under. Toronto 6 games under. Baltimore 7 games under. Boston 8 games under. So all those teams way back. The AL Central, Chicago right now at 47 and 42. Got to be the biggest surprise in baseball. 5 games over 500, going to go into the All-Star game over 500 unless they have a horrible week. They're a game up on Cleveland, 4 games up on Minnesota, who's 3 games under 500, and then Detroit and Kansas City are a ways back. And then in the AL West, Seattle has finally strung some wins together and moved into first place in that division. But Texas, just a game and a half behind them, and really even Houston not far off the mark. The Athletics have finally fallen, significantly below 500, but given their existence at the moment, 41 and 49 and only 5 games out of first place this late in the year is not bad for them if you sort of using the sliding scale. National League, we were talking just now about the Phillies, and this National League East, boy, Atlanta 52 and 36. They've been great all year. Philadelphia 50 and 41. And it's interesting. Philadelphia has a -7 run differential still to be 9 games over 500. And when you see how bad they started the season, my father mentioned the Mattingly, changing to Mattingly as the manager. The Phillies have been one of the best teams in baseball really since the start of May, somewhere in there. Let's not ignore the Florida Marlins, who are 7 games over 500 at the moment and only a game behind Philadelphia and 5 games behind Atlanta in the NL East. And even Washington is a game over 500. And I had no idea the Nationals were a game over 500, but there they are. And then way back where you can barely perceive them is the New York Mets at 37 and 53. NL Central also lots of teams with good records. Milwaukee's got the best record in baseball outside of the Dodgers, don't they? By a lot, yeah. Milwaukee 55 and 33, 6 games clear of the Cubs, who are 10 games over 500 in their own right. St. Louis, a very surprising 47 and 40 this year. Pittsburgh, a game over 500, which again, for Pittsburgh, a week before the All-Star game, to be a game over 500, pretty damn impressive for them. Cincinnati has fallen off. They're 7 back. And then in the NL, you got the Dodgers, 59 and 32, just a machine as always. San Diego, Arizona, a game back, or a game under 500, 14 back of the Dodgers. And then San Francisco and Colorado bringing up the rear. And then in a wild card picture, just to do this real quick, in the AL, every team except Kansas City and the A's is within 5 games of the wild cards. Right now, the wild cards would be the Yankees, Cleveland, and Texas. Texas being the 3rd wild card at an even 500 at the moment. In the NL right now, it would be the Cubs, the Phillies, St. Louis, and Miami tied. Everybody but Cincinnati, San Francisco, the Mets, and Colorado within 4 games of a wild card. So, another month or so from now, when we got about a third of the season left, we can take a little bit harder of a look at who's where and what the situation is. But, still a little too early for that. Certainly some surprises on the positive side. Miami, the White Sox, Pittsburgh being over 500 at all. And then on the other hand, you have, Toronto, who was in the World Series last year, in a Game 7, chance to win the World Series. They're under 500 by a significant amount. Obviously, the Mets are the biggest disappointment in baseball. Some other teams that just, you expected to be a little bit better, and just the Red Sox just continue to be really horrendous the last handful of years. Still a lot of time for teams to make moves, and obviously literally make moves in July when we get closer to the trade deadline. But we'll obviously have a lot more to say about baseball as we go on. Ben Rice hits a homer for the Yankees, so they are now up 5-1, 3 outs away from getting a much needed victory. I think we'll start circling for a landing here. We're obviously getting closer to the start of training camps and stuff like that, where, in football, we're about a month away from, when is the first preseason game? Is actually a good question. That's regular season. The Hall of Fame game is Thursday, August 6th. So exactly a month from tonight. is the first preseason game, the Hall of Fame game between the Panthers and Cardinals. So training camp's all probably 3 to 4 weeks away. And then we will start to get ready for week 1 of the NFL season. Obviously as we get closer and haven't talked a ton about it yet, kind of understandably, but we'll have a lot of it's going to be an interesting Giants season. I don't know that it's going to be a good season, but there's certainly more reason for optimism, even if it's longer term, than there would have been, any recent year or most recent years at this time. Obviously when we get to, July, when we get to August, rather, we can talk a little more concretely about all that stuff, but we're not really there yet. So, again, no show next week. We will be back 2 weeks from tonight. It'll be Monday, July the 20th. We'll be just have gotten going after the All-Star game in baseball. Didn't really talk too much about the All-Star game. So, I could just read the rosters off, but may as well just do that yourself. All-Star game a week from tomorrow night in Philadelphia. We'll be just starting the nominal second half of the season in baseball. Yankees will be coming off a series with the Dodgers. We'll, have another 2 weeks of the free agency stuff in the NBA. We'll see if there's any more moves the Knicks make. We'll see where LeBron James ends up. Are there any more, significant trades that get made, anything like that? And, we'll start to probably inch our way towards a new season, a new sports season. I'm in the early stages of I usually do this a little earlier, but with the wedding and everything, I did not have much energy, but starting to put together my Army season plan for this year, who's coming to what games with me and stuff. So we'll be into September before we know it, and into football, into college, and into the NFL, and the stretch run in baseball. And, it'll be a different thing this year because come October, it will be very interesting to see this year. We talked about how much the Knicks have captivated the city the last couple of, years, and obviously the last few months. It will be interesting what happens when the Knicks come back in October, because we'll have the playoffs, we'll have the baseball playoffs, which the Yankees will probably be in for at least a little while. Both football teams will be playing, and ideally they won't both be 0-5. But as we get to the Knicks are about to start, and it's opening night, and you would assume probably sometime in August the TV schedule will come out, but you would assume the Knicks will have a high-profile first game at home the night they probably unveil the banner and the rings, and the Knicks are going to be on primetime TV. They already are on a ton, but they're going to be on primetime TV 40 games this year or whatever. But it will be interesting to see how much of that attention they immediately grab back from baseball, from football, or if it's going to be more of a slow burn, wait till the playoffs are over, wait till the football teams are eliminated, which could be before the baseball playoffs are over. And then the Knicks will have the city's undivided attention again. So it'll just be interesting, but that's still a ways off. So with that, we'll wrap up. Again, no show next week. I will be in South Carolina. We will be back 2 weeks from tonight, Monday, July the 20th, for
when you book your Coastal Carolina stay with Vrbo, peace of mind comes built in. Download the app and book now.
Split decision. But in the meantime, send things off as usual with our Techno Super Bowl music, and we will see you 2 weeks from tonight, Monday the 20th, 7 o'clock, right here on YouTube Live. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. 2 weeks. We will see you 2 weeks from tonight, Monday the 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a nice night, everybody. Have a nice week, 2 weeks. Have a good summer. See you in school.